Ladies, gentlemen, and invokers of all ages, happy holidays, season greetings, but today it's time to hand out the season's beatings, because upon hitting tier 15 maps and moving on to pinnacle bosses, I've been retooling my invoker more and more, trying to work out the most comfortable ways to just both apply buttloads of damage and stay alive without a massive amount of effort required either. We've gone through a ton of different evolutions. We started off focusing heavily on Stormwave, we moved on to Falling Thunder as our main clearing skill to mess with charges, and while Falling Thunder is still incredible for a mapping build, today I want to go more towards a focus on pinnacle bosses, and to keep everything sort of synergizing together without having to make a massive passive tree swap whenever you want to do a pinnacle boss and then swapping back to mapping back and forth. It just made sense to bring back good old Stormwave instead. The main reasons are that this is far more spammable and consistent, and while the damage per use is less than a 7 charge Falling Thunder, of course, the ailment application gets really solid with Stormwave. For mobbing, we mix this with the Pole Cirkeln unique ring, which lets you shatter chilled enemies as if they are frozen, and you can basically just trigger the chain popping explosions from Herald of Ice to just obliterate any larger groups without even fully freezing them with this now, including one-shotting any rare that is unfortunate enough to have friends nearby. And then even when this doesn't have friends to trigger on, your Stormwave can easily deal with rares from a distance, and you have massive burst if you want to get up close and personal instead through the classic combination of Tempest Flurry and Tempest Bell, but with a few key upgrades since the last time. Now, on top of cold and lightning damage, we also have added in some flat fire damage from our gear in order to apply ignites as well for even more damage stacking, and we also have Eye of Winter worked into the build now, especially for single target like pinnacle bosses, as it puts a stacking debuff on enemies that makes them more likely to be critically hit. We trigger this through Elemental Invocation, which with our hefty tri-ailment and elemental setup, we build extremely quickly just by slapping Charged Staff Tempest Flurry into a boss with Tempest Spell underneath them. Then we add on power gain from our final Ascendancy Points, unlocking Unbound Avatar, which builds power when you apply ailments to enemies, and then you can spend this upon reaching 100 stacks to activate an enhanced state where you do 40% more damage and 40% more ailment buildup for over 10 seconds, which is where our absolute sort of gigaburst period comes from. On top of this, we have also converted our charge generation method to something a bit more active but also more effective for our current use of it, using Hand of Chayula to apply Sniper's Marks for guaranteed power charges on demand, given we already have a focus on stacking crit chance, but then using this to also apply more curses and marks to our enemies as well. All of that to say, everything plays and looks a fair bit differently from the last time that I checked in and showed you guys how my build was developing, but it's just gotten even more effective with every single change. That said, let's start off with the proper breakdown by talking about our skill gems and the supports that we've got running inside of them. First up, Unbound Avatar from our Ascendancy Points. We already talked about what this does, and because it counts as lightning, cold, and fire as a skill, we can nicely bump the duration up a little bit by giving it each of the cold, fire, and lightning mastery supports as well, which each boost the level of their related skills by 1 level for a 3-level boost to the skill, as it counts as being every element. An important note here, if you ever respec out of Unbound Avatar in your Ascendancy nodes, it seems to just like send your support gems to the Shadow Realm, so always manually take out your support gems from Unbound Avatar if you're going to change off of it. Then we have Stormwave, which is our main damaging skill from range. It's our main thing that we use for mapping as well. With quality applied to this, it actually increases the width of the wave itself, which makes it far better at AoE than it is without that upgrade. And inside of this, we have Inspiration as a support gem for 40% less mana cost to make it far more spammable, Longshot to increase the damage after 3.5 meters of distance up to its maximum damage bonus at 7 meters away. We try to keep enemies at as far a range as possible just to stay alive, honestly, so always try to hit with the end of the Stormwave hitbox with this. We then have Primal Armament for 25% more elemental damage from weapon with this, as well as Heft for 30% more maximum physical damage. Because we are using a physical damage weapon, the boost to the physical damage apply before the damage of the skill itself then converts into lightning. Primal Armament applies after the fact as well, to then boost the lightning and the cold and the fire that we do too, so the sort of order of operations here makes both of these actually overlap to be a very hefty damage increase. With another support gem slot in here, if I had the perfect Jeweler's Orb for it, I would use the Ambush support gem, which makes skills have double crit chance against full life enemies, which make this even more likely to just result in a one-shot chain from the first enemy hit with it when mapping properly with this build. Then we have Tempest Flurry as our next sort of main skill, and this is your main trigger for Charged Staff and Tempest Bell due to its just insane attack speed potential. Its range also allows you to hit both your priority target and the Tempest Bell at the same time. Inside of this, we have the Martial Tempo support for more attack speed, Ice Bite, which gives us 35% bonus damage as cold damage after we freeze an enemy with the skill, which does does actually count the bell when we place that down too. Then we also have Rage, which gives us 1% bonus attack damage per stack, 3 stacks gained on melee hit with a short internal cooldown between stack generation, and with the other support gem slots on this one, if I had them, I'd be using Overcharge, which dramatically increases the magnitude of shocks applied by the skill at the cost of lower shock duration, but then also Stormfire, which makes shocks from Tempest Flurry not expire on enemies that are ignited, hence why we worked in the flat fire damage for the ignite procs and single target fights as well, which does include on Tempest Bell itself, of course. Speaking of which, next up then is Tempest Bell. You want to build up 4 hits through using Tempest Flurry to deploy the bell itself, which will then reverberate any damage you put into it out when you hit it, applying elemental damage bonuses to its hits as well if you apply ailments to the bell, and we apply all 3 of the ailments that we can to the bell. Inside of this, however, we also have concentrated effect for more damage from the skill at the cost of smaller range. However, we use this entirely just for bossing, so that isn't really a negative in the first place, honestly. Then we have Close Combat for 25% more damage to enemies that are within 1 meter. Again, that's the place that we'd use the bell anyways, and then we also have Rage Forged. This makes the bell consume 10 rage if possible to increase its damage by 35%. This seems to increase the damage for the full duration of the bell, so we build Rage through Tempest Flurry, building combo, then spend it into the bell for a damage boost on the echoes from Rage Forged when we actually spend them. As well, currently for specifically pinnacle bosses, I'm swapping the heft support out of Stormwave and into Tempest Bell instead of Close Combat, as it is a meteor damage increase to our more single target focus skill. With 2 more support gems on this skill, I would have a slot to just open to move heft into permanently whenever we do single target, just move it back and forth and it would be empty when we're not doing single target. Then I would bring back Overabundance as a support too, which we've been using for a while to increase maximum Tempest Bells to 2, which allows for even crazier burst potential in the single target. After that, we also have Charge Staff as a skill. This applies a flat lightning damage buff to our quarterstaff while active, which ends up being quite a bit of bonus damage as a result. It costs 1 power charge to activate the buff, with its maximum duration and maximum stacks of bonus damage, scaling off how many power charges you spend up to your maximum. Inside of this, we have the Perpetual Charge support for a chance to not consume charges on use, Electrocute to give Charge Staff Electrocute buildup instead of Shock buildup, and then Persistence for 40% longer duration. For pinnacle bosses specifically, it's worth swapping Persistence over to being inside of your Unbound Avatar to extend your burst phases by 40%. If I had another support slot here as well, I would stick in Neural Overload, which makes Electrocute trigger when enemies are primed, which for normal enemies means when they're at 40% electrocution buildup, which scales up with enemy rarity. This would allow you to consistently electrocute smaller enemies at the very least. However, this isn't a necessity so much as a quality of life upgrade, as we aren't using Combat Frenzy anymore to generate our charges. Instead, what we're using is Hand of Chayula, which dashes to the targeted enemy to apply any socketed curses and marks. Inside of this, we have Sniper's Mark, which makes your next critical hit against the target generate a frenzy charge. This is a bow skill, but you don't actually need a bow to use it, that's just the section that you get it from. We turn the frenzy charges from this into power charges through the Resonance Keystone within the passive tree, so every time that you use this skill, you then get a critical hit on that enemy. It's just extremely consistent to do because that's one of our focuses in this setup. Then you will get at least 1 charge. To boost that, we also have the Profusion support gem to gain 50% chance for a bonus charge when triggered, and then we have Conductivity to reduce lightning resistance of enemies hit by Hand of Chayula. We already ignore resistances on crits, but adding this on for boss fights when we already are generating our charges just makes the damage a touch more consistent outside of the crits too, and for any enemy that doesn't have lightning resistance, this puts them to negative lightning resistance, which is of course really good too. As well, with more supports, I'd be able to just add more curses into Hand of Chayula specifically, especially Enfeeble as an example, to reduce enemy damage too, as this is mostly great for bossing in general. Then we have our spirit skills, and technically we have 6 auras, but I want to be clear that there's a little bit of shenanigans going on here to achieve that. I am showing you how the build would look if I had 20 more spirit than I do, probably, which is pretty easily achieved with a slightly better bit of body armor than what I'm currently wearing. Otherwise, it requires a little bit of fiddling. First then, in our actual active skills then, is Wind Dancer. This gives you a bonus multiplicative increase to your evasion per stage that you have, up to 4 maximum stages if you have quality applied to this too, which is actually quite a nice upgrade to your evasion rating. Every time that you are actually hit by a melee attack, meaning that it goes through your evasion, it will trigger Gale Force, which is a bit of damage, but also importantly, an AoE knockback around you. So this will stop you from pretty much just getting pinned in and unable to escape if enemies can close the gap, get in melee range, and actually hit you because it knocks them back. It will then blind them because we have the blind support in here too, which reduces their accuracy, and this just stops you from ending up in situations where you get trapped in a corner and beat up by a bunch of guys. Then we also have the main support gem in here too, basically for extending that same concept, because this will then slow any enemies that are hit by the actual blast from Wind Dancer, and this will stop them from being able to chase you quite as hard too. After that, we have Herald of of Ice, and this is honestly where a lot of the damage will come from for properly mobbing. It's sort of nutty strong right now. We have a unique ring that lets us trigger this explosion from shattering enemies to just chilling enemies instead of even fully freezing them, and that of course makes it even sillier. Inside of this we have Innervate as a support for bonus lightning damage after you kill a shocked enemy with Herald of Ice, as this will be responsible for a lot of your kills in mobbing based content anyways, and then Magnified Effect to boost the area of effect of the actual explosions from Herald of Ice. After that we have Grim Feast, which is just ridiculously strong as a defensive aura, giving you energy shield back from enemies that you've killed, which can even overflow to be double your maximum energy shield amount. My next major shift within this build is going to be moving myself towards stacking more energy shield as my main defensive stat, partially because of how strong Grim Feast is in itself, and then partially just because as you get further and further into the end game, for the early access at least, and especially into pinnacle bosses, evasion and armor are worth a lot less than energy shield is comparatively. Armor gets worse the larger the incoming damage hit is, and evasion gets worse the higher your enemy's accuracy is. But energy shield will always be energy shield. If you have a bit of defensive layers on top of a focus on energy shield, it gets really strong, arguably the strongest of any defensive stat in Path of Exile 2 currently. In this we have Clarity for 30% bonus mana regen while this is active, which is always, and then we have Precision for 30% increased accuracy while it's active too. Then we have Elemental Invocation. This is our monk meta skill. This gains energy when you freeze, ignite, or shock enemies. We do all three of these quite consistently, which generates energy extremely consistently as well. Inside of this we have Eye of Winter as the main spell that it will trigger, which is a cold spell that fires out little projectiles that apply critical weakness. Critical weakness is a crit chance multiplier against the affected enemy, so this boosts our crit chance significantly in single target especially, as this is a multiplicative crit chance increase, not even just an increased crit chance. Elemental Invocation does require manual activation as opposed to the other meta skills, which does make it slightly more of an investment than something like Cast on Shock or Cast on Freeze, but because we are applying 3 ailments that grant energy in this, it is far more efficient to use this, and the way that it functions, you can even build up to spam firing out 4 Eye of Winters in a row if you want to just apply full stacks in a split second as well, which gives you a lot more control over where your burst periods are within a fight. As well, inside of this we have Cold Exposure, so the damage from Eye of Winter reduces cold resistance of enemies, and then Impetus for 40% increased energy gained with Elemental Invocation whenever we apply our ailments. With more support gem slots inside of this, I would also use Energy Retention for a chance to refund the energy spent on triggering this, especially as we can consume 4 Eye of Winters in one cast, which if it procced that support would give us the energy to immediately then again cast 2 Eye of Winters right away anyways. Then finally I would stick in Decelerate just so the actual projectiles from Eye of Winter stay in range of the proper target we're aiming for a longer period of time. Then we have our bonus slot down here. This skill slot only exists because I have an Unset Ring equipped. Unset Rings give you a bonus skill slot, and if you have slightly more spirit than I currently do too, you can also have Ghost Dance in here active at the same time as all the rest of these for immediate energy shield regen when you get hit, relative to your evasion rating. Or alternatively, you could slot in Herald of Thunder for even more effective mobbing on maps and an increase to your lightning damage in general. Either way, the requirement to do that and have this 6th spirit skill would be having 190 spirit minimum, and that's if you cut out the precision support, but either way you can easily hit far higher than that as a maximum spirit number on an Invoker with a really good body armor piece to actually sustain it and activate it. As far as how to play within this setup then, for mapping you want to use Hand of Chayula to sort of open up the fight, then roll away to a safe distance and start spamming Stormwave. If you get a critical hit, you will gain a power charge, so you should use it on charged staff and your damage will increase as you apply this buff. If you get lucky, you can apply power charges multiple times through charged staff and get full stacks from one Hand of Chayula proc, otherwise you'll have to use it a couple of times to get your stacks rolling. Once you have all of your stacks for charged staff, just walk around spamming Stormwave at your enemies from a very safe distance, and then make sure that you just use Hand of Chayula to gain another power charge once every 15-20 seconds or so, just so you can keep your stacks from falling off. For bossing and single target focus, start with Hand of Chayula to apply the mark and curse, use Tempest Flurry until you crit or generate 4 combo, apply charged staff, stick down Tempest Bell, Tempest Flurry from a position where you'll hit both the boss and the bell with every hit. Whether mobbing or bossing, you also want to use Elemental Invocation as enough energy builds up to keep important enemies having the crit weakness debuff. Then you want to use Unbound Avatar for a burst of damage, especially in single target situations, to initiate just a really powerful phase where you just unload everything you have. Best executed directly after firing off some Eyes of Winter to apply crit weakness and into a fresh Tempest Bell. As well, I'll be more specific in the gearing section, but we don't use the unique ring for bossing, instead replacing it with a ring that has life and mana leech for better sustain in prolonged fights. Moving on from that, we have our Ascendancy Points damage for the build, starting with Sunder My Enemies to ignore positive elemental resistances on your enemies when you get critical hits. This is a massive damage bump in specific situations, of course. Then we grab I Am the Blizzard, and what this does is give you bonus damage as cold damage, which helps us apply our chills and our freezes, as well as chilled ground created when you freeze an enemy, which also boosts Eye of Winter's cold damage when it passes through it. We also then grab Bleeding Through Grace, which gives you bonus spirit, equivalent to a portion of the energy shield and evasion on your body armor slot. Currently, I am very hard evasion stacked on my chest, but as we talked about before, deeper endgame, nothing is really as good as energy shield, so one of my next improvements to make to my own gear is actually swapping off of that into a heavier energy shield body armor. That said, for a pure evasion body armor, you would want at least 1350 if you want to use the 6 spirit skill setup we got with clarity as a support too, or for mixed evasion and energy shield on your body armor, which is more ideal long term, you would want a minimum of 800 evasion and 250 energy shield. This including having your quality applied as well and any modifiers on the gear, and then the socket filling runes that give you bonus evasion or energy shield as well. That said, super long term, like the perfect 10 out of 10 version of the setup would actually not even use this upgrade. It would change our chest piece over to the Temporalis Unique, which costs just a fuck ton of divines if you have them. We would get a bunch of Dona Spirit from other sources like an amulet, and then use Blink as a persistent buff for permanent 0 cooldown teleport evades with that unique, but that's a bit of a pipe dream for most players because of how expensive it is. That said, the final 2 Ascendancy Points go into And I Shall Rage, and this is what unlocks Unbound Avatar as a skill. After that, we have our passive tree on a larger scale, and some changes have been made since the last time that we talked on this front as well. We still start by going up the energy shield and evasion nodes over here, and then over into Essence of the Mountain here for a percentage of our damage as bonus cold damage, as well as bonus free buildup too. We then wrap around through the evasion and energy shield increasing node over to the attack speed and attributes notable, up through the crit chance and then crashing wave notable for increased damage if you've dealt a critical hit in the last 8 seconds, and then we go up to a bunch of attribute nodes that will follow up. As for the attribute nodes in general, you want as much strength as is necessary to support our support gems. Intelligence I've got sitting at 136, but you can manage at around 96 if you have lower skill levels. If you're not quite as heavily geared yet, you can do that. Anyways, we head up over and through these to the elemental damage cluster up here, going into Echoing Frost, which gives you increased elemental damage if you chilled an enemy recently, also Echoing Thunder, which is the exact same thing but for shocking enemies, and Echoing Flames, which is again the exact same thing but for igniting enemies. We do all 3 of these, so this is a really big pile of elemental damage increase just by getting into this cluster here and taking all these nodes. Then we wrap around over here through Critical Exploit, which gives you a bunch of increased crit chance, as well as some crit damage along the way, and then up and over into Melding, which is a bunch of increased maximum energy shield at the cost of some reduced maximum mana, and of course if I had a few more points, you can see that I'm also building towards Insightfulness over here for just another increase to our maximum energy shield. Again, I want to really focus on building energy shield up long term, and this is one of the big ways that we can do it for a small amount of actual passive point investment. Then we go up and over here into Conservative Casting. This is sort of a short-term fix, really. This gives us lower mana cost of our skills and increased mana regeneration rate. If we had better mana management from our actual gear than I do currently, you might not actually need this, so your version of this build with your equipment might not need Conservative Casting. These could be 3 points that you can save and move elsewhere, but right now, I need them, so they're there. Then we go up and over here, over to the Resonant Keystone passive, which changes all of our Frenzy charges from Sniper's Mark into power charges to function our charge staff off of. We then head up into our first jewel socket, and generally speaking, for jewels, what you want is stuff like increased attack speed, quarterstaff damage, elemental damage, energy shield boosts, herald damage, mana leech boosts, or if you get something like a time lost jewel, you're after things like bonus damage to rare and unique enemies especially. We then grab this juicy cluster over here, which has a bunch of crit chance and crit damage increasing notables, including a bunch of dexterity and crit chance, intelligence, and crit damage bonus, more damage if you've dealt a critical hit recently, which we already stacked, more crit chance, and then more crit chance, and again more damage if you've dealt a critical hit recently. So we are stacking a lot of damage, a lot of crit chance, and a lot of effects based around critical hits. Then we head up and over here into Spectral Ward. This is again something that we're using right now. It fits the fact that I'm currently using a very high evasion body armor, but once I reach my goals, which are having a lot more energy shield from my body armor and having a mixed evasion energy shield piece within that slot, this will probably have less value and it might be taken out of the build, but for now it is still being used. Then we head out and over to the jewel slot over here, down and through to the Wildstorm notable for 15% more maximum lightning damage, and into the overflowing power cluster here too for 2 maximum power charges, as well as increased critical damage bonus after we consume power charges, which we do regularly anyways. We then head down around the outside as well, in through the actual quarterstaff cluster. This is full of just really powerful nodes. It's got increased attack speed with quarterstaff, quarterstaff. It's got increased freeze buildup. It's got knockback on crits as well with the quarterstaff, which does help create a bit of extra space. It has increased crit chance and crit damage with quarterstaffs as well. And importantly, the one with the storm, notable here, makes it so that quarterstaff skills that consume a power charge count as consuming a bonus one. So if you only get one power charge, you can still charge up your charge staff for 20 seconds worth of buff with 2 stacks of the actual damage increase, which is really good to be able to do reliably. We then head down to the Herald cluster, and in here our aim is Coming Calamity, which gives you 50% increased cold damage because we are always affected by Herald of Ice. If you have more spirit than I do and you can work in Herald of Thunder into the build too, then you would also get 50% increased lightning damage from this too, which is very meaty for one node. We then head down through these very important critical chance increasing nodes here, up through the Struck Through notable, as this gives you a bonus 1% to your base critical hit chance, as in the crit chance that will be on your weapon. What this does is apply under all of our other increases to critical hit chance, so this is a very big singular point increase to our focus on critical hits. Then we head up and over in through Bestial Skin for increased evasion rating from your equipped body armor. Again, this is one of those nodes that's very good for me right now because I have a very high evasion body armor, whereas when I switch to evasion and energy shield mixed, I might not keep this. Instead, I might just go up this side and go up in through enhanced reflexes over here for the enhanced evasion rating and also the percent bonus to dexterity, which would save a couple points here too. We then head through the very high dexterity nodes over here, up and over through the Falcon Technique notable node, which gives you 1% increased attack speed per 15 dexterity that you have. We end up with a lot of dexterity, especially the better your gear gets, the more dexterity you will get, and the more attack speed you will get from this node as a result. We then head down for a couple of points here just to get another jewel slot, but this is more of a short-term thing which will be moving later on. Because what I plan to do with my next points, because obviously this is all I've got right now, but I still have more points to go, I'm not level 100, is I would go up through the outer edge here and over towards Chaos Inoculation. You want Chaos Inoculation once you have enough energy shield to make it reasonable. If you have like 600 energy shield, you don't want Chaos Inoculation because essentially you'll just have a 600 health pool then. However, once you get to like more than 2000 energy shield, this plus the fact that it makes you immune to chaos damage actually makes this extremely effective, especially because of the ways that you can use to stack energy shield that we've got once you've got more energy shield from your actual equipment itself than I currently do. So this is a long-term goal for us to take Chaos Inoculation, but it's not something that you want to take before you have the energy shield to sustain it. After that, we head through this jewel slot, which will replace the one that we had down at the bottom, and up and over into this node over here for a bunch of bonus intelligence, and here for some bonus maximum energy shield, and Patient Barrier, which gives you a big chunk of increased maximum energy shield too. And that would put you at the end of the points that I would theoretically have if I didn't remove nodes as well, but what I plan to do is remove some nodes here, like remove these 3, remove some from here as well if I feel like it makes sense, and then if we can get enough points, the actual sort of pipe dream here to add onto this is to go all the way up through the center of this lightning cluster to get to Pure Power, which gives you increased lightning damage scaling with how much intelligence that you have. So of course, as your gear gets better, as you get more intelligence, you also would scale your lightning damage, which is quite a good combination, and it would incentivize us to actually scale our intelligence more too, which we want because some of our actual skills do work off of intelligence in the first place. Finally then, we have our equipment, starting with our weapon itself. Generally speaking, in the proper endgame, a good physical base weapon will simply outscale an elemental base weapon, even if most of your damage done is elemental. Because of the way that skills convert into their elemental damage after the fact and exactly how that's done, you want to actually have a high physical damage base. And with the barrier quarterstaff base as well, if you can get all your good stats on one of these, which does make it more expensive, it does actually offer you an extra defensive layer with the 10% block chance too. However, past that, you do want flat increased physical damage and percent increased physical damage as your 2 most important stats to focus on high rolls for on your weapon. Then crit chance and attack speed are equally quite important. Levels to all melee skills is really strong, but it dramatically increases the mana cost of your skills, and they get a little bit out of hand in my opinion for this build if you do stack extra levels. Instead, I recommend just aiming for something like flat elemental damage on top of these 2, whether it be cold, lightning, or fire for your weapon. And hey, if you can get some health or mana leech from physical damage on your weapon too, that'll be just a bit of a cherry on top. On your rings and your gloves then, you want a heavy focus on flat damage elemental damage bonuses as well, with my specific setup being 1 ring with high flat fire damage so I can consistently apply ignites, and then 1 ring with flat cold damage and lightning damage too, as well as leech as life and mana. I swap off of this second ring here for the unique ring that we were talking about earlier whenever I'm going to be doing mobbing or mapping, and then I put this actual ring back on over here, mostly for bossing, mostly because of the leech that it gives me too. Then on my gloves, these are relatively weak right now, they're one of my worst pieces, but you get flat elemental damage bonuses, which are great. You can get attack speed, which is great too, and for your amulet, you want energy shield bonuses. This is where I get a good pile of intelligence as well, and and mana regen 2, as well as some resistance. But crit chance here would be ideal as well. As far as anointing your amulet, as far as instilling it with distilled emotions to actually get bonus notable passives on it, the cheap option that you can get for not too many exalted orbs to actually make it happen is Tainted Strike. This gives you an increased critical chance for your attacks in general, as well as increased magnitude on non-damaging ailments that you inflict with critical hits. This most notably would increase the actual potency of our shocks, which is very good as that would increase the damage taken from enemies in general. Past that, if you have a lot more orbs to spend, if you want to get the really powerful potent things to add on, something like Lightning Quick gives you a bunch of increased attack and cast speed with lightning skills, as well as increased lightning damage in general, which is a good thing to stack too. And it's worth mentioning as well, if you can get crit chance on your amulet, that would be ideal as well. On your helmet, you could even go full energy shield base if you did some passive tree fiddling, but ideally for offensive power, you would get crit chance on your helmet as well. Otherwise, focus on building up those defenses, getting some attributes, and then some resistances in too. For your body armor, currently I am full blast into evasion rating stacking on body armor, but as I've mentioned, I'm looking to shift this far more towards energy shield in the future, so this is a do as I say, not as I do type of moment. But outside of that, and wanting even more defensive modifiers to match too, a double resistance chest piece is pretty solid. Then for your boots, you want to focus movement speed above literally anything else on them. The higher the movement speed, the better, but you can also use this to sort of sort out a lot of your resistance issues as well. As for your sockets and such, your highest priority is just filling out your elemental resistances, making sure that you actually reach the maximums, and if you eventually switch into Chaos Inoculation on the passive tree once you have the energy shield to make it worth it, you actually won't need any chaos resistance at all. But until you have that, I recommend building it through the actual sockets where applicable as well. It's also worth noting the elephant in the room right now, which is the increased rarity of items found modifier. Obviously you want as much of this as you can on every piece of gear, but this is pretty much the most expensive modifier to add on to your ideal gear pieces. That pretty much does it then, everyone. A full breakdown of what my current build looks like in early access for Path of Exile 2, retooled towards being way better at bossing while still being extremely potent at mobbing and map clearing too, without too much switching in between content styles too. This has been working extremely well for me. I'm in need of some hefty gear upgrades, sure, as soon as I can get my hands on them, and a few divine orbs will get me there, but other than that, the actual setup around my gear, I'm actually extremely happy with at the moment. So if you all enjoy using it too, if you try it out for yourselves. Like if you liked the video, subscribe to the notification bell for more, and most importantly, ladies and gentlemen, until next time, stay sweet.
Josh, Cotton, and Hollow with the videos, dropping the humor like a hammer on your tippy toes, bringing entertainment on a daily arrangement to take our insanity and turn it into entertainment. Yes, I said entertainment twice, to reiterate that it is nice to look into your faces on a mostly daily basis when you let us in your homes to make the whole world a stage. Goodbye.